Here at Department of Psychology and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Aarhus. I used to be affiliated with our Center for Functionally Integrative Neuroscience as well, which means that I'm a neuroscientist, obviously. I have now moved to our new Interacting Minds Center, which is a cross-disciplinary center trying to move some of the stuff that we know about cognitive science, some of the stuff that we know about ethnography, technology, and all kinds of weird science is trying to get into the field of minds interacting together in some way. And we're pretty interested in games because a lot of interesting interactions are going on between humans and technology in games, and because games spark a lot of interesting interactions between people in general. So we both see games as something that we study in our lab and as labs for studying a lot of different human phenomena. One of the things that I've been wondering a little bit about is that I was just asked to come here and do my thing, but I have really no clue who I'm talking to right now. So can I just get a quick show of hands? How many of you guys are students? All right. How many of you guys are from the health business or health area in some way? Yeah? How many of you are game designers or aspiring game designers? You can be a student and an aspiring designer as well, yeah? Scientists, teachers? All right. Okay, so a pretty eclectic mix, which seems to mean that I've made the right decision about how to weigh this presentation. Except that it kind of got garbled now for some reason. How bad is this? Okay, it's not so bad apparently. So what I am going to talk to you today about is, first of all, I think I'm going to just say why I think games are so big at the moment. Some of the sort of cultural things that have been going on for the past maybe 5, 10, 30 years to take us where we are today with gamification and games and stuff like that. Then I'm going to move on to what I personally, speaking from a psychology, neuroscience, educational psychology point of view, think that games do well, not in an attempt to design them, just to define them, but just to say what I think they're really good for. Because sometimes we forget sort of these basic things when we have these conversations. Then I'm going to present a little taxonomy that I have, wherein I try to make a distinction between just stuff that's alluring design, stuff that's just attractive design that people want to play around with, but isn't really games for a number of reasons. Stuff that's good games, which is Jim G's term for games that are really good, stuff that people would buy in a shop and play out of their own volition if they had the chance. And gamification as the last sort of genre that we might be able to discuss if we want to understand what kind of game design techniques we might be able to employ in the service of research, data gathering, health games, education, stuff like that. And finally, I have some very secret psychology results and that I will share with you, and I will also tell you in a minute why they're a secret. But to sort of start with the historical stuff, this is sort of the basic stuff that I try to tell everyone before I really get into a talk, but some of the things that's been changing a lot, why we teach psychologists who are taking educational psychology at Aarhus a little bit about gaming, is that gaming is, of course, a vastly expanding field. And that's just not because people are becoming more geeky. That's, I guess, also part of some parts of culture, but one of the sort of main things that have lured a lot of older people into gaming, lured a lot of women, different people who are not sort of the average greasy geek sitting around in his parents' basement kind of people, are this whole casual gaming revolution, as Jesper Juhl has put it. Games moving into mobile platforms, games being moved away from the screen media, and I should say that I'm not very interested in minds interacting with screens. I'm interested in minds interacting with games out in other contexts than just sort of the person-screen interaction. So that's where I'm coming from at the moment. I also, I also forgot to mention, I also have a background in game design, but I can't program anything at all. I have no technical skills. So what I have been working on and with for the past number of years is building board games and card games for educational and persuasive purposes, which there are points to be made about in the context of social learning, in the context of getting people to share their knowledge instead of just trying to force feed skills or knowledge through some sort of fixed design. So casual games, obviously a huge influence on why we're all here today, I guess. Another thing is that we now have this possibility of quantifying biology and behavior in completely new ways. We have sensors in our pockets, in our phones, in a lot of the different appliances that we have at home. And these sensors gather data. Your phone can pick up where you are. Foursquare is a game based on where you have been at any point. There are games that where a sensor quantifies how much you brush your teeth, and that will translate into a small game with keeping a little monkey's dental health, for instance. These sensors can be placed in lots of different contexts in our lives, and this is something that's pretty new, and which means that gaming is not just making a game about something, it's also making a game of something. That's usually what we mean when we say gamification. So the sensors and the mobile platform is also a huge new development. And obviously there's a lot of research and there's a lot of buzzwords going around with the whole gamification thing. It's already been mentioned a few times, but one of the main reasons why gamification is such a huge buzzword is that there are some really clever business people who are not good scientists. Many of them aren't even very good designers, but they are very good at selling these ideas to companies who really want to generate consumer loyalty, to lure people into their website, stuff like that. So there's a lot of writing going on. Some of it's good, some of it not so much. But my standpoint, at least at the moment, is that there are many claims, but the solid facts, the empirical data is still something that is very much a work in progress. For some of the stuff like changes in cognitive skills, there is some good evidence going on. For instance, it's at least from my neck of the wood, there is this general acceptance that brain training games generally do not work any better than any other activity that you might spend. You taking that time, you don't need to play a game. Just having a conversation with other elderly people will actually stimulate a lot of sort of the brain plasticity and keeping the brain young in the same way that playing brain training games will do. So this is a huge problem, that there are a lot of people selling stuff that we as scientists actually have a fairly good idea does not work, as they say at least, in the same way that we would hope that it would sometime in the future. So a lot of writing, not so many facts. And of course, the whole and the main problem that I'm faced with often is there anything special about games that's not just adding chocolate to the broccoli? Is there anything that games do better than just sort of making something a little more attractive, a little more fun, so kids will say, ooh, this looks like fun because my cereal is in different colors or something like that? How is this different from Lucky Charms? Is a big question going on. And finally, there is a counter discourse that a lot of people try to ignore, but I think it's still pretty important. There are still a lot of people out there concerned about the downsides to games. There are people who believe that games are addictive. In the psychology community, it was just rejected as a formal diagnosis. Gaming addiction. It's now just part of sort of overall psychological addictions, but so it was rejected in the new DSM manual. There are concerns about the Columbine stories. Will games make people violent? Will games take kids' priorities away from their schoolwork and to playing Counter-Strike instead? All these kind of things. And as designers and scientists, we actually need to take this seriously, because if we claim that we can do good things with games, then obviously for that claim to hold, it follows that you can also do bad things with games. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And there are many, many different applications for games, and a lot of different people are working with that. I've noticed that some of the speakers here are working with educational games, so I've been doing for a long time. But health is a really emerging field, especially since games have been divorced from the computer screen and moved into real life. Education, civic engagement, consumption, nudging, sort of small behavioral changes in everyday life. And one of my grad students at the moment working on sort of the derived psychological and social benefits from playing casual games. For instance, are there actually studies showing that playing casual games as a relief for stress or something like that is actually any beneficial at all? And at the moment, she hasn't been able to find any sort of conclusive evidence of that. So there are a lot of ideas about that. Oh yeah, and games with purposes, which is something that is also sort of a shadow side of the whole sensor thing. Having people play games means that we can amass a massive amount of data about what goes on between their minds and the things that they're interacting with. And we're at the moment working on at the Department of Theoretical Physics at Aarhus. We're working with those guys on a game that's designed to outsource the programming of a quantum computer to human brains by having human brains solve very particular small problems that the quantum computer's AI cannot deal with, but the human brain can. So you can actually now, through games, start outsourcing really, really complex things that we need to know about, problems that we need solved. So those are other areas as well. Just sort of to give you guys an idea about sort of the larger field that we're moving in. Ribble. Oh yeah, and it's not a new idea by any stretch of the imagination. As far as I know, it's in the first sort of published, printed, sold game that I know of is called The Reward of Merit, and it's from 1801, and that was an educational game, or actually a sort of Bildung game. It's about Victorian merits. It's about being a good boy by being quiet and kind of sort of conforming to the standards of society at that time. And somebody said that Monopoly was developed after the Great Depression. That's not actually true. It was published after the Great Depression, but the first version of this game that we know of as Monopoly, and which actually existed in like 5 or 6 different versions before it was published, was, as far as we know, invented as the landlord game, which was an argument for economic idea called the single tax, which is basically based on the idea that the people who control the land control the most economical resources, and therefore those should be the people who are taxed and not the people living on the actual land. So the idea is not new at all. The technologies are, though. So what I think games do well, there are a lot of good arguments to be made, but this is just sort of my theoretically based, but also very personal feeling about, and from experience, what I think games can do well. One thing that I think games do very, very, very well is that they frame an activity in a different light than it would otherwise be conceived as. So it changes people's expectations, it establishes a shared focus around an activity, and this is one of the reasons why people often say, let's play a game, when they want to sort of make a team-building exercise, stuff like that. It pulls down some of the psychological boundaries and shifts people into a different meta-motivational standpoint towards what's going on. It's not about the actual utility of what's going on, it's about the activities that people have together within that framework. Also, games structure people's actions. A lot of board games, a lot of the games that I've been making for consultancy settings are really a way of presenting information, questions, dilemmas in a stepwise manner, which means that you can actually sort of control the sequence in which people will encounter different kinds of experiences, thoughts, discussions, prompts, stuff like that. And a lot of game designers tend to or people in this area tend to underestimate that particular very, very nice feature of games, I think. But what most people are talking about is, on the other hand, the motivation. That's what people really like about games. They motivate people to do something inside the game, and hopefully to keep on doing that thing after they've actually played the game. So progress through the frame structure and interest and pretext on practices. Yeah. So an example of the whole framing, structure, and motivation bit is that there are a lot of good board games for telling stories out there. These are games that are really, really popular, excellent games, really good to play with people who are not hardcore gamers, that help people who don't fancy themselves storytellers, don't think they're really creative, to tell stories together, fairy tales, sort of metaphor, wordplay, stuff like that. So frames can help to structure and motivate really basic human activities, as I believe telling stories are. And I think that these games like this, are an example of what Jim G has called the good games, the games that actually work as games as well as in a practical context. They do something, but they are also actually very good games. And as Gunvor mentioned before, there are a lot of people who want to make health games, but or educational games, but who are not game designers. They don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge, and for that reason they do it as experiments. They do it because they got the money to do it, but they end up with something that isn't really any good at all. And that's really a general problem. I'm not trying to scold anybody, I'm not pointing any fingers, but it is a problem in a developing field that a lot of people are scrambling to get on board, right? But these are actually examples of good games, create the fact that they're actually on market in many different versions. An attempt to go with this good game is some of the stuff that Simon and the guys are doing at Serious Games Interactive, namely trying to actually work with the game design tropes and the expectations that people expect from a real game, a real good game, like a first-person shooter or something like that. This is more like an adventure game. But the Global Conflict series and some of the other sort of edutainment titles work on the premise that if we make a good game and jam some content, whatever the serious purpose might be in there, then it will be a better tool for education, or it will be a good tool for education at any rate. So working with sort of that good game formula, making good games which are also educational. And there's also something that I've been working on. I brought samples. If anyone would like a free game, this is an educational game, a health game that I actually helped to design with a stand-up comedian. He was a Danish champion in stand-up like a number of years ago, and this beautiful sex educator. They do something called Mass and Nana's Sex Show, where they tour the country and do sort of a mix between stand-up and sex education at schools and high schools and stuff like that. And we made this game, which is called Lovesick, as an additional teacher's aid to help teachers dealing with this actual health problem and the didactical problem that teachers often have a lot of trouble connecting with the kids in the right manner in this, because they have to be the math teacher one day and the next day they have to speak about vaginas. So often a problem. We try to help out with that. You can grab a set if you actually are an educator, you want to use it. Grab maybe 4 of them. That should be enough for a classroom of like 20, 30 kids. Otherwise, just grab one for the fun of it. You're welcome. They're in Danish, but there are English rules online. And we also think this is a good game because it actually plays like, or it's an attempt to make a real game that looks like a game, feels like a game, but it's also about something serious. And the secret is it's just Uno that we put wee-wees on. So compared to good games, gamification is a little bit different in my mind. Gamification is a little bit different because it does not necessarily look like a game in the standard sense of the word. It does not present itself in a game in the same way that these good games do. They say, hey, I'm a game, play me because I'm a game, I will be fun, I will be engaging. So gamification is more like the toothbrushing game. It's stuff where you add a little bit of game sprinkles to otherwise normal activities. At least that's what I think. The most recent book about gamification that I got by a guy named Cap said that gamification is just using games for anything serious. I don't think that's the case. I think gamification is a little more narrow than that. It's about using game stuff in a serious context, but not entire good games. So other examples of that would be Yummy Rummy, which is sort of the American version which is on the American version of Just Eat, which I used a lot when I lived in Chicago. Every time you eat, I think like 4 or 5 meals, you get to play a game of rummy. If you pick the right card, you will get a free soda with your next meal. It's not really, you don't order the food to get to play the Yummy Rummy, but you still enjoy the experience when it comes along, and it actually motivated me to buy a little more from them as compared to their competitors. And also, since the game experience is the actual reward after a number of meals, they only have to give me a new soda every 4 times I actually play the game, which is pretty neat. And finally, of course, the badges that are pretty hard to avoid these days. You can be pretty snarky about these because it's what everyone thinks gamification is about. It's what everyone is trying to sell, but it's there, and it's a way of signifying achievements and giving feedback in a pretty tangible manner. You can make arguments about it being based on behaviorism. My argument as a psychologist counter to that is that, well, why is that a problem? Because behaviorism actually counter to what people like to think it works. So no need to be so snarky about it. It's just old news, I think. Yeah. And sort of the last kind of games that I would like to mention is that there are also stuff that sort of presents itself as something funny, something that you'd really like to interact with, but it's not really a game at all because it doesn't conform to the rules about having tangible outcomes, having sort of skill challenges, randomness going on, stuff that you can actually attach to. It's just stuff that looks funny, something that you would like to play with, in Danish, lege, contrary to playing a game to win. So they are like alluring designs. I think that's a pretty important example as well. And this piano stair is often brought up as an example of gamification. And I think this is an excellent point why it's not gamification. You can't win this game. You can play around with it. It's fun. It's attractive. It's alluring. But it's not a game in sort of the strictest ludological sense of the word. So that's why I placed that in alluring designs as well. And one of the sort of arguments that I've been trying to make is that a lot of times when people try to make a game for learning, they're not actually building a game, they're game forming. They're shaping something to look like a game in the hopes that people will engage with it in a certain way. And that's the experiment that I just want to share a little bit of results with you guys before I end up. And the reason why it's secret is pretty much that it's not published yet. So these data isn't something that I'll have to remove the slide before I actually get it sent out, because we have strict codes of ethics as well at the Psych Department in Neuroscience in Aarhus, and we can't actually publish any data before it's been peer reviewed, and this is in peer review at the moment. So if we take these, my sort of 3 categories seriously, you can say that there are the good games, the alluring design, and the gamification as sort of 3 different sides of the same coin, a weird triangular coin, I suppose. And my sort of structuralists' minds trying to put this into boxes is that there are like two main variables going on, two design dimensions, namely form, sort of, does it look like a game? Is it attractive? Is it something you'd like to monkey around with? And mechanics, which is the stuff that game designers work with in long times. I mean, every single game I have made has taken a day or two to brainstorm, and then it's taken months and months of playtesting and tweaking and working with to get the mechanics right, to make sure that the points are actually distributed right, to make sure that the challenges are balanced, all these kinds of things. That's the mechanics of the game, as compared to sort of just the story and the look and feel of it. So you actually get sort of a nice quadrant model with good games, which are high on mechanics and form, gamification, which is high on mechanics but low on form, alluring design, which I also sometimes call game forming, which is high on form but low on actual mechanics, and then some stuff that isn't actually games at all. So the secret psychology results of this is that we wanted to test the hypothesis that you can shape something like a game, make it look like a game, and actually change people's interactions and expectations through that small design manipulation alone. So I got a hold of the graphics guy that we made the Lovesick game with and had him design this really cool looking game board. Then we made lists of questions that we wanted students to discuss. This is something that we do every once in a while. We get student satisfaction surveys out, then we get them back, and we realized, oh fuck, we're performing subpar on a bunch of things. We need to get some focus groups in and have them discuss what's actually the problem. Why are the students at psychology less happy with the teachers than are the ones in social science and stuff like that? So instead of just doing sort of the regular, put them into a group, have them discuss each question in turn, we added a game board. And the only set of rules that we added in sort of the basic manipulation of this experiment was that we said, before you move down to the next question on the list, you have to move your pawn one square on this game board. And that was it. That was the only game thing going on at all. So there were stuff that was that looked like games, that felt like games. Oh yeah, sorry. The questions were presented on cards in a stack instead of on a list. But I hope you can see that it's basically exactly the same activity, except that it looks like a game and it uses like recognizable game artifacts. So what we did was that we told them that we needed to test this new cool consultancy game that we had, and we wanted to see if it was actually any good, so we wanted to make a test of it. Had divided them into 3 different groups. One group's being the control group, doing the basic sort of discussion task that some of them have done a million times before. Another group just working with sort of the stepwise move a pawn, turn a card, discuss kind of thing. And the last group, which we thought the reviewers might say, okay, so why didn't you make an actual game? We'd want to see if there was a difference, if this was actually a good game at all. So we added a little bit of competitiveness, a little bit of point stuff like that, which I don't need to go into. You can ask me if you want to know about it. But basically, we tried to make it feel a little bit more like a game in that there could actually be a winner. There were performance contingent feedback on the way, which meant that they could move their pawns a different amount of positions depending on how well they facilitated the discussion when they were the ones reading the card. So a little bit of manipulation there. After 30 minutes, we said they had to stop because they were supposed to play for 30 minutes, but we still did not have the surveys that they needed to fill out. So we asked them to could you just sit tight at the table so you can keep on playing if you want to, or you can do something else. Does anyone recognize this experimental setup from psychology? No, okay. It's Ryan and Deese's intrinsic motivation basic setup. That's what they do. They have some scales that they ask people to evaluate the experience on subjectively, and then they see if people will actually do the thing on their own accord behaviorally after they've been given the choice to not do it at all. So 2 different measures, behavioral and self-report, for about 20 minutes until the experimenter said, okay, now the question is here, you can stop whatever you're doing and you can fill these out. And what we found was basically a very limited amount of results. There was not so much difference between these groups. All these students are pretty dedicated. They're psychology students, so usually they were high achievers in high school. They are really sort of teachers' pet kind of students, a lot of them. This is the God's honest truth. So they felt that this was an important and attractive activity to be part on no matter what. So on the scales that we actually tested them on, the only difference that was actually made, the only significant difference between the control group, the ones that didn't have a game, and the other 2 groups, which were kind of equal, was that they thought that the ones who had been given a game board experienced it as more fun. They thought it was more fun. They reported this was more fun. This was a more engaging and interesting activity. But on all the other measures that we have for total intrinsic motivation as a compound of the interest enjoyment measure, which was actually significant compared to importance and effort, competence, did they feel good at it? Did they feel autonomy? Did they feel like they had choices underway? Relatedness, did they feel a good social coherence in the group? They all did. That's a very high one. And value usefulness, was this actually any good to me as a student in my life? The only thing where there really was a difference was on interest enjoyment. And the only measure where we could find any difference at all between the group that had just been given a game board without any actual gaming going on and the group that had been given a game board with a little bit of gaming going on was that the people who had more gaming going on, the people who could actually win, answered significantly higher on a sort of an exploratory variable where we asked them, did this feel a lot like a real game? Yes, it did, because they obviously picked up tacitly on some of the ideas that we had about what makes a game feel like a game. So very little differences. Unfortunately, we didn't get any good behavioral results. It's not because I think they weren't there. It's mainly because our computer software got jumbled in one of the conditions. So we don't have good comparison data, unfortunately. So I may have to run it again. That depends on the reviewers. But the problem is now the cat's out of the bag. Some of the students know what's going on, so we can't deceive them again, and that's always a problem. I had 90 students taking part of this, which is sort of what we needed to get the statistical power we wanted. So that's kind of the secret test of the alluring design hypothesis, which I think we confirmed through this design. Yeah. So sort of if I were to come up with a design recommendation based on this very limited, small, very controlled psychological experiment, it would be that when you design something for serious purposes, you need to seriously consider what are the actual effects that you're going for, how can you extrapolate those from game design. So if you just want to lure them in, if you just want people to peek inside your shop, you can go with the attractive design. If you just want them to feel like it's a bit of fun, sort of just have the subjective experience of having fun, then you can go with just adding the game board and screw the actual mechanical game design. The game experience, what's going on there, that's a completely different story there. You might need to go to some of the to take Gunvar's course to find out what will happen there, what you need to do, how to balance the mechanics, and of course, what kind of effect are you going for? Do you just want to change people's behavior as long as they're in the game? A lot of sort of the behavioral-based gamification is based on having people keeping on doing something because they'll get another badge, another level, or some sort of other interesting feedback and a development in the story around the next bend, or do you just want them to, after having played the game, to change their attitudes vaguely about, say, the nursing profession? There's a game being built at UC. I think it's at UCL actually about that. So yeah, and just finally, if you want to work with us, if you have cool game ideas, if you have a cool game design and you want it tested in a way that's scientifically rigorous, you actually want these data. You don't just want to tell people, yeah, we designed it, so it was great. You actually want some cool. Some people like me getting in on it. We are very open to that kind of thing at Interacting Minds. So come find me or visit us at Aarhus University. We have a lot of cool toys for measuring biological responses to games. We have dedicated brain scanners, MRI scanners, stuff like that. We can do all kinds of crazy stuff as long as we can get good science out of it. So you are very welcome to come find me if you're interested. And congratulations, you guys won. You actually sat through the whole presentation. Thank you.
And the most important part of your presentation is to give out a badge or two. So you need to give a quick question.
Yes, quick question for the real.
Oh, he's put his arm up already.
Thank you for sharing the secrets. I hope they will be public. Maybe. You talk about the measurements here, that often can be a challenge. For you, from a scientific point of view,
yes.
I was thinking about connecting to the former presentation from Gulliver Michael. Did you actually have some measurements of the flow state in the gameplay?
Sorry, and that's Lars. Lars was going to say.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to present myself. I'm one of the teachers who brought all the wonderful students here.
Cool, well, thanks for that. No, we did not measure that. I don't really know of any good ways of measuring flow because it's supposed to be kind of a really absorbed state. And one of my pet gripes as a cognitive psychologist, neuroscientist with the whole flow idea is that is that sort of metacognition is supposed to be suspended within the flow state, which means that it's pretty hard to actually get a beat on people being in flow, because that will have to mean they have to disengage from the activity and reflect on what's going on at the actual moment going on. So no, we don't. But I think what people do when they try to do this is they use more biophysical measures like skin conductance, heart rate, that kind of thing. And the whole thing that we're hoping to do next, one of the things that we're testing right now, is we want to see if we can pick it up on an EEG scanner. So we want to use EEG headsets, if they are any good, the cheap ones, to monitor people playing games and engaged in other activities. So no, but I think it's possible if you do it in the right way. I just haven't picked up on the exact good way of doing it.
Because I think it's very